So here's a question to kick us off. Is genius some kind of, I don't know, rare inherited spark? Like a lightning strike you're either born with or not? Or is it maybe more like a fire you build yourself, carefully adding fuel, tending the flames?
That question, it really cuts right to the heart of what we've been looking into. We've been diving into this really fascinating set of insights, mostly centered around a book that's often called The Genius Report, or in English, The Genius in All of Us.
Right, the genius in all of us. And it's not just that one book, is it? We've looked at analyses, discussions, all sort of building on its core ideas, pulling from psychology, real-world examples.
Exactly, a whole range of material.
And our mission really with this deep dive is to unpack the, well, sometimes surprising findings from all this, to challenge some of those deep-seated myths we have about genius and creativity, because it seems like the material suggests it might be something much closer, much more accessible to you than maybe you've ever thought. Okay, let's get into it.
Yeah, let's do it. I think what jumps out almost immediately is how strongly these sources push back against that traditional view.
Yeah.
The one that's kind of culturally ingrained sometimes. That genius is all about, say, high IQ scores or just being able to memorize tons of stuff.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that's a pretty big shift right away. They're not defining genius like how we might have been tested back in school.
Exactly. They really redefine it. It aligns much, much more closely with the sort of Western idea of a creative person.
Okay, creative.
Someone who thinks differently, who can look at a problem and genuinely come up with a new idea, a fresh approach to solve it. It's really about the output, the process of thinking, not just like raw cognitive horsepower.
And is this creativity something they see as like locked away only for a select few?
No. Crucially, no. And that's maybe one of the most hopeful takeaways here. They argue creativity is actually inherent in everyone. It's there maybe to different degrees, but it's there. And most importantly, it's something that you can actually discover and intentionally develop. It's not some fixed trait you're stuck with.
That really does fly in the face of the whole born genius thing we hear so often. I noticed one perspective, particularly around discussions linked to David Schenk's work. It has the same title in Korean. Interestingly, it really hammers this point, challenges that idea of innate talent or strict genetic determinism.
It absolutely does. It suggests our genes are less like a rigid blueprint dictating everything,
Right.
and more like a really complex switchboard, a switchboard of potential
Yeah,
possibilities.
switch row. Okay, what does that mean, like in practice?
Well, it connects directly to this idea that our development is made, not just born. It moves us beyond that old, often unhelpful nature versus nurture debate.
Yeah, that one.
Instead, it embraces nature via nurture. It emphasizes the dynamic, the constant interaction between our genetic potential and, well, the environment and the experiences we actually have.
Okay, so like a seed, maybe? No matter how good its genes are, it still needs the right soil, water, sunlight, all that
Yeah.
stuff to actually grow and, reach its potential. The environment flips the switches on the switchboard.
Precisely. Your experiences, the effort you put in, the stimulation around you, all that interacts with your genetic makeup. It influences which potentials get expressed and how they develop.
Hmm.
So this perspective suggests that human potential is actually far, far vaster than we usually assume. And it can be continuously cultivated through focused, intentional effort.
Intentional effort?
Yeah, the sources touch on what's sometimes called deliberate practice, that idea of consistently pushing yourself just slightly beyond your current abilities.
It also really resonates with the concept of a growth mindset, right? Believing your abilities can be developed through dedication, hard work. They're not just fixed. Okay, so it's this constant dance then between your genetic possibilities and the world you live in, shaped profoundly by the effort you put in. That raises a really interesting question, though. If genius and creativity can be developed, what are the specific qualities or approaches? What do these highly creative people actually cultivate? What do the sources highlight as key?
Right, and that's where the sources focusing on Scott Barrett Kaufman and Carolyn Gregoire's work really come in. They dive deep into the specific characteristics observed in creative individuals.
Okay.
They identify several key traits that seem to be cultivated by people who achieve these creative breakthroughs. Now, we probably won't get through their entire list, but let's look at some of the really compelling ones highlighted in the material we reviewed.
Sounds good. What's the first one they emphasize?
They talk about imagination play.
Yeah.
And this isn't just about kids playing with blocks or something.
Right, right. It's more about recapturing or maybe cultivating that sense of childlike curiosity even when you're an adult, isn't it? Seeing things without all the layers of preconceived notions we build up, being open to connecting ideas that seem totally unrelated. They call it a rediscovered childhood.
Exactly that. The sources use a fantastic example.
Hmm.
Shigeru Miyamoto, the game designer, the genius behind Super Mario, Zelda.
Oh, yeah, legendary.
His childhood apparently was spent exploring caves and forests near his home, making toys out of scrap wood.
Hmm.
And that directly influenced the sense of wonder and exploration you feel in his game.
You absolutely feel that when you play them. It really does feel like being a kid again, exploring this amazing backyard full of possibilities. Didn't he have this philosophy that basically anything could be turned into a fun game, even like trying to lose weight, which led to the Wii Fit?
That's the one. It's just such a powerful illustration that play is often where creative thought is born. It helps build a more flexible brain. And it's definitely something adults can foster, bringing that sense of playfulness, that curiosity to their work, finding ways to balance the serious stuff with, well, fun.
Yeah, I think George Bernard Shaw said something like, "We don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing." The sources quoted that. Exploring new things, letting yourself experiment, trying stuff that might even seem a bit silly, that kind of active engagement really seems to fuel creativity.
Absolutely. Then the next trait they discuss is passion. The source is called the most powerful source and the absolute fuel for any creative endeavor.
And this isn't about chasing fame or money, is it? It sounds like something much deeper.
Precisely. It's primarily fueled by this intense internal joy and intrinsic motivation that comes from the work itself.
Ah, okay.
Think about the examples they give. Cellist Jacqueline Dupre, apparently age 4, heard a cello for the first time and immediately said, I want to make that sound.
Wow, at 4?
Or Louis Armstrong, discovering his lifelong passion for the trumpet while he was in a detention home. Josh Waitzkin, the chess prodigy, was captivated at 6, became a champion incredibly fast.
Those sound like those lightning strike ignition moments.
Yeah.
But don't the sources also distinguish between different types of passion?
They do, yeah. They talk about harmonious passion, where you feel in control. The activity aligns positively with who you are, versus obsessive passion.
Obsessive. How's that different?
That's often driven more by external validation, maybe feeling controlled by the activity, and that can lead to anxiety, burnout.
Right, it makes sense.
So the key, they argue, is cultivating that harmonious passion, falling in love with the process of creation itself, not just focusing on the potential outcome.
That makes a lot of sense. If you love the process, it helps you push through those inevitable times when things get boring or frustrating or just plain hard. It explains why highly creative people are often described as incredibly diligent, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The sources give examples of people driven by this internal passion who studied like 11 hours a day or routinely worked late into the night just because they couldn't not do it. They were just fueled by the sheer joy of the exploration or the creation.
I remember one pretty extreme example mentions someone who supposedly ate only boiled eggs because it meant they could keep studying while waiting for them to cook. That level of focus is intense, but it comes from that internal drive.
Yeah, pretty intense.
Yeah.
Another characteristic that might surprise some people is sensitivity.
Yeah, that one's interesting. You often associate sensitivity with maybe being withdrawn or introverted, but the sources point out it can show up in extroverts too, right? Even in fields like what? Heavy metal music.
That's right. Sensitivity, as the sources describe it here, is more about the ability to perceive subtle details, patterns, connections, things that other people might just overlook.
Mm-hmm.
It's about noticing things in your environment, maybe finding structure in what looks like chaos, or extracting really profound meaning from everyday experiences.
They used the example of Michael Jackson, didn't they? Incredibly powerful on stage, captivating, but described as painfully shy and sensitive, especially when he was younger. Stories about him needing the lights off to record because he felt too exposed. He's quoted saying something like, "It hurts and is difficult to be me."
Yeah. And this heightened perceptiveness, while maybe making life feel more challenging or intense sometimes, is presented as a significant asset for creativity. It lets you experience the world more vividly, to see it as more colorful, more dramatic, more tragic, and more beautiful, as Pearl S. Buck suggested in a quote they used.
The sources also use that lovely analogy, dandelion children versus orchid children.
Yeah.
Dandelions are resilient, thrive anywhere. Orchids are more sensitive to their surroundings.
All right.
Orchid children might struggle in tough conditions, but if they're nurtured in the right environment, they can bloom in these extraordinarily beautiful ways. So sensitivity, interacting with your environment, It profoundly shapes your curiosity and how you learn.
Moving on, another trait they highlight is mindfulness. This is about actively paying intentional attention to the present moment, being aware.
Ah, the Joshua Bell subway experiment. That's a classic example the sources bring up here. This world-class violinist playing an incredibly valuable Stradivarius during rush hour in a busy DC subway station.
And what happened? Most people, thousands of commuters, just rushed right past, didn't even notice.
Yeah, only a tiny handful actually stopped to listen for more than a moment.
It's just such a stark illustration, isn't it, of how much beauty, how much talent, how much richness we just walk past every day because we're not fully present, we're not paying attention.
Totally, our minds are elsewhere.
Exactly. Mindfulness, as psychologist Ellen Langer puts it, and she's quoted in the sources, is the simple process of actively noticing new things.
And she suggests that creative work itself can actually be a form of mindfulness training. When you're fully immersed in a creative process, you're constantly noticing new possibilities, new angles, new aspects of whatever you're working on. Everything looks different from a slightly different perspective when you're truly looking.
It really is about anchoring yourself in the present, being open to novelty, to surprise, being sensitive to your surroundings, which connects back to that sensitivity trait we just talked about.
Mhm.
The sources suggest that the constant distractions we face now, texts, emails, social media feeds, they're making us increasingly scattered, less mindful. They mentioned Steve Jobs, who was a known meditator, finding it a source of creativity, helping quiet the mental noise so he could perceive more subtle things, see more clearly.
It's about being fully there, isn't it? Open, receptive to what the world is offering in that specific moment.
Exactly. And finally, let's touch on thinking differently. The sources see this as absolutely fundamental. You can't really have a significant creative breakthrough without it.
And this is more than just having different ideas, right? It's about actively pushing back against conventional wisdom, being willing to challenge the status quo.
It requires courage, definitely. The sources reference that famous Apple Here's to the Crazy Ones ad campaign, honoring the misfits, the rebels, the ones who dare to think differently enough to actually change the world. It takes real guts to pursue original ideas, especially when they meet resistance, even ridicule. Like historical figures, Giordano Bruno challenging the views of the cosmos back then.
And the sources make it pretty clear that true innovation has almost always met with resistance at first.
It really has. But creative people, according to this material, they understand that failure is just part of the process. They're willing to accept the possibility of being wrong. They know that brilliant ideas are often mixed in with many, many attempts that just don't work out.
Yeah, like Isaac Asimov is quoted saying something about how someone willing to defy reason, authority, common sense, they must have enormous confidence, and they'll inevitably seem eccentric to others. Even many scientific breakthroughs that eventually won Nobel Prizes were apparently rejected initially when submitted for publication.
Right. Thinking differently doesn't necessarily mean you have to be some kind of revolutionary taking on the whole world order, though. It can start much smaller. Just making a conscious effort to see things from a new perspective. Maybe questioning assumptions you've always held, stepping outside your usual way of thinking about a problem.
Sir Ken Robinson's point comes up, too, about how the education system sometimes makes people afraid of being wrong. That's relevant here, isn't it?
Right.
You're unlikely to come up with anything truly original if you're terrified of making a mistake or putting forward an idea that isn't immediately accepted.
Absolutely. So these traits, imagination play, passion, sensitivity, mindfulness, and thinking differently, they aren't just abstract concepts. The sources present them as active ways of engaging with the world and with yourself. They're ways of being that creative individuals cultivate, which really strongly suggest they are pathways that anyone can explore and practice.
This whole deep dive looking into these sources, it really does seem to confirm that genius isn't some fixed mystical thing you're either, blessed with or not. It's profoundly shaped by your environment, your interactions, and maybe most critically, by intentionally cultivating these specific traits and approaches.
Exactly. We've seen how embracing that childlike imagination, fueling your drive with that inner joy, perceiving the world with sensitivity, staying mindful in the present, daring to think differently. These aren't just qualities of some born elite group.
No, they seem to be pathways. Pathways accessible to all of us, potential that can be nurtured. The sources really strongly suggest that understanding these traits and actively exploring them in yourself can help you unlock and develop your own creative potential, which could lead to a richer, more engaged, maybe more fulfilled life. It sounds like it's about embracing the full spectrum of the unique, complex person you already are.
So if cultivating these traits can help unlock your potential, maybe the question for you, listening, is, which single one? Even just a little bit. Which one will you choose to explore or practice in your own life, maybe starting today? What small change might just spark a bigger, more creative you? It leaves us with a crucial question, really. What's the first step you will take?